Akihito, the Emperor of Peace, Science, and Humility. Part 1. A Prince is Born, the Dawn of a New Era. 1933, 1945. On the early morning of December 23, 1933, as Japan stood amid the shifting tides of the early Shōwa era, a cry echoed within the Meiji Palace, then located inside the Imperial Palace compound in Tokyo. At precisely 6:39 a.m., Akihito, the fifth child and the first son of Emperor Shōwa, Hirohito, and Empress Jun, Nagako, was born into the sacred lineage of the Chrysanthemum Throne. His birth, a moment of national significance, symbolized both continuity and renewal within the imperial institution. He was given the title Tsugu no Miya, meaning Prince Tsugu, signifying the one who succeeds. The name Akihito was carefully chosen by his father, inspired by a passage from the 1870 imperial rescript, Daiki Senpu, reflecting the ideals of clarity and virtue, Aki meaning bright or clear, and Hito symbolizing benevolence or compassion. The emperor's personal emblem, or O-shirushi, was the character ring, A, meaning flourishing or prosperity, a poetic expression of hope for his growth and future leadership. His early childhood was thus enveloped in the rituals and symbolism that accompanied imperial life. On December 29, only 6 days after his birth, he underwent the traditional bathing and bowstring ceremonies, followed by his formal naming ritual held at 11:00 a.m. These ancient rites were conducted by nobles and high-ranking military officers, a reflection of the still powerful presence of aristocratic and martial traditions in pre-war Japan. Born into a family with a complex mixture of tradition and modernity, Akihito was surrounded by siblings who would also go on to live public lives connected to the imperial family. His elder sisters included Teru no Miya Shigeko, Princess Shigeko, Princess Sachiko, Princess Kazuko, and Princess Atsuko, while his younger siblings were Prince Masahito, Prince Hitachi, and Princess Takako. His early upbringing, however, would depart markedly from that of his ancestors. In 1936, at just over 2 years of age, Prince Akihito was formally separated from his parents in accordance with imperial customs. He was relocated to the T.G. temporary palace on the grounds of the Akasaka Palace, where he began his official education under the supervision of appointed court educators and tutors known as T.G. Fuyukan. This distance from his parents, emotionally difficult, though typical for imperial upbringing at the time, laid the foundation for the stoic and dutiful character he would develop. His academic instruction began earnestly in 1940 when he entered the elementary division of Gakush, in the elite educational institution traditionally reserved for members of the aristocracy and imperial family. Here he was taught under the leadership of Principal Katsunoshin Yamanashi and trained in traditional disciplines such as kendo, which he practiced under the tutelage of Nobukuni Tetsu's. Among his classmates were future influential figures, including Tais, Fujishima, and Kunio Anzai. As the shadow of war grew darker, Prince Akihito's youth unfolded amid the tumult of global conflict. On December 8, 1941, while he was in his second year at Gakush, Japan entered the Pacific War against the United States. By 1944, in his 5th year of elementary school, the intensification of World War II prompted the evacuation of Prince Akihito and a group of about 40 classmates from Tokyo to the Numazu Imperial Villa in Shizuoka Prefecture. Following the fall of Saipan in July of that year, fears of a mainland invasion intensified. Akihito was further relocated to the Tamazawa Imperial Villa in Nik Tochigi Prefecture, while his younger brother Prince Masahito went to Yamauchi, and his schoolmates were housed in the nearby Kanaya Hotel. Even in this remote location, the war was never far away. Rumors reached the imperial entourage that a map had been found on the body of a downed B-29 crewman near Tokyo, showing local factories as bombing targets. By mid-July 1945, following a devastating air raid on Utsunomiya, Akihito and his companions were moved deeper into the mountains, to the south building of Yumoto Onsen, in Oku-Nik. The final phase of the war was experienced by the young prince in almost monastic seclusion, subsisting on meager wartime rations, foraging for wild herbs and catching fish to supplement their meals. On August 15, 1945, Prince Akihito, then 11 years old, listened to the imperial rescript on the termination of the war, commonly known as the Gyokuan HS, broadcast via radio from a separate room away from the other evacuated children. 2 days later, officers from the army who refused to accept the surrender attempted to retrieve the prince for a proposed symbolic enthronement to galvanize further resistance. But his military escort, having received secret instructions from the commander of the Imperial Guard Division to protect the prince at all costs, refused. One major warned the plotters that such actions would brand Akihito as a rebel and deny him the future throne. The attempt failed, and the prince remained in protective custody. The war's end marked the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter, not only for Japan but also for the young prince destined to one day become emperor under a radically transformed constitution. As Tokyo lay in ruins and the East Palace had been consumed by fire, Akihito and his entourage remained in Nik until November 7, 1945, when they finally returned to the capital. In the difficult months that followed, his education shifted to embrace the liberal ideals of the post-war era. In April 1946, Akihito began studying English under the guidance of Reginald Blythe, a British professor at Gakush in university. Later that year, he came under the influence of Elizabeth Gray Vining, an American Quaker and renowned author of children's literature. She became his personal tutor, shaping his values with a global and pacifist perspective. She affectionately gave him the English name Jimmy. Their warm relationship symbolized a quiet but profound cultural transformation unfolding in post-war Japan. In June 1949, he accompanied Vining to the Daiichi Life Insurance Building, then the headquarters of the Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, where he met General Douglas MacArthur. The meeting was described as cordial, and MacArthur is said to have been impressed by the prince's calm demeanor and intelligence. During these years, Akihito also developed a love for intellectual pursuits such as board games and biology, often challenging his father to games of reversi, sharpening his mind for future responsibilities. By the end of the war and its immediate aftermath, the boy born into an empire had become the young symbol of a reborn nation growing up in the shadows of both tradition and devastation, tutored in diplomacy and restraint, and molded by war, survival, and hope. Part 2. Crown Prince Akihito, a heir shaped by post-war transformation, 1946, 1959. As Japan emerged from the devastation of World War II into a new era of constitutional monarchy and democratic governance, the role of the imperial family was undergoing an unprecedented transformation. For Crown Prince Akihito, adolescence and early adulthood unfolded within this rapidly changing landscape marked by reconstruction, international diplomacy, and the quiet dismantling of old imperial norms. In 1952, at the age of 18, Prince Akihito officially reached adulthood under the imperial house law. On November 10 of that year, a formal ceremony called the Rittaishiki was held at the North State Room of the temporary imperial palace. This rite acknowledged his status as heir apparent and future emperor. On the same day, he was awarded the Grand Cordon of the Order of the Chrysanthemum, the highest honor in the Japanese honors system. This ceremonial recognition coincided with the symbolic redefinition of monarchy in post-war Japan. The prince, no longer a demi-god-like figure as under pre-war ideology, was now cast as the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people under the 1947 Constitution. In the following year, 1953, Crown Prince Akihito embarked on his first overseas journey, one that would shape his worldview and redefine Japan's image abroad. He was sent as Emperor Shōwa's official representative to attend the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II of the United Kingdom. It was a momentous occasion not only for the young prince, but for Japan's post-war diplomacy. This would be the first time a member of Japan's imperial family traveled abroad since the war's end, and it was the first major royal event Japan had been invited to since rejoining the international community. Akihito's journey, which spanned from March 30 to October 12, took him to 12 European countries, the United States, and Canada. In London, he sat as the 13th guest at Westminster Abbey during the coronation ceremony, a significant, if not entirely exalted position, given the lingering tensions from the war. Despite a cool initial reception, a warmer exchange took place later when Queen Elizabeth II invited him to sit beside her during the Epsom Derby. This gesture signaled the softening of relations between the former wartime adversaries and helped ease Japan's re-entry into global society. The voyage, while historic, came at a personal cost. Because of the lengthy trip, Akihito was unable to fulfill the academic requirements for advancing at Gakush in university, where he was enrolled in the Department of Political Science. Rather than accept an academic promotion for formality's sake or retake courses with students in younger years, he chose to withdraw officially and continue as a listener, or Heisei, so that he could remain with his peers. This decision reflected a blend of humility, a sense of fairness, and his growing awareness of public perception equality that would define his reign. Upon returning to Japan, Akihito faced a health crisis that he kept private for decades. In December 1953, he was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a common but dangerous illness at the time. Thanks to new antibiotics like streptomycin, he recovered fully by 1957. This personal battle, though concealed from the public during his youth, would be disclosed later in 2009 during a national tuberculosis prevention conference, showcasing once again his openness and willingness to reflect on his own human vulnerability. Meanwhile, the question of marriage loomed large for the young crown prince. In post-war Japan, the symbolic power of the imperial family took on a new significance, and the choice of the future empress was a matter of both political and public fascination. After years of deliberation, in 1957, fate intervened on a tennis court in the mountain resort town of Karuizawa. There, Akihito met Michiko Shōda, the daughter of Shōda Eizaber, then chairman of Nishin Seifun Group. Michiko was elegant, highly educated, and cultured, but more importantly, she was a commoner. Their relationship grew quietly but steadily, and soon the news broke that the crown prince was intent on marrying her. The match, while celebrated by many as a symbol of a modernizing monarchy, drew significant opposition within the court. Empress Jun and other senior courtiers viewed the idea of a commoner marrying into the imperial family as an affront to tradition. According to the diary of Chamberlain Masamasa Iri, Empress Jun and two imperial princesses protested directly to Emperor Shōwa, expressing their concerns in strong terms. Despite these objections, Akihito stood firm. His insistence on marrying Michiko marked a turning point in imperial history and public consciousness. The engagement, announced in 1958, captivated the nation. A wave of enthusiastic public support dubbed the Michi Boom swept across Japan. People saw in the couple a break from rigid aristocratic customs and the promise of a new, more relatable monarchy. Their love story symbolized the democratization of Japan's most sacred institution. On January 14, 1959, the formal no-sai no-gi engagement ceremony was conducted, and on April 10, a grand wedding ceremony took place. For the first time, the public witnessed an imperial wedding broadcast on national television. The streets were lined with cheering crowds, and for many families, this joyous occasion spurred the purchase of television sets, a technological and cultural milestone. The parade through Tokyo was filled with unrestrained joy and hope. The young couple's romance and their evident affection for one another marked a dramatic and welcome shift in the tone of the imperial family. Later that year, Michiko became pregnant, and on February 23, 1960, their first son, Naruhito, was born. He would one day become the 126th Emperor of Japan. The birth of a male heir secured the succession and further cemented the crown prince and princess's status as beloved figures among the Japanese people. That same year, Akihito and Michiko became the first imperial family members to attend the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Ceremony, establishing a legacy of engagement with post-war memory and national healing. During this period, Akihito was also preparing himself for the responsibilities of the throne by learning the rituals of the court, deepening his understanding of modern constitutional governance, and reflecting on the evolving role of the emperor. It was a quiet but profound metamorphosis, from war-born prince to post-war heir, from a symbol of aristocracy to a man embodying compassion, humility, and learning. Part 3. The evolving role of a crown prince: diplomacy, family, and public engagement. 1960. 1988. As the 1960s unfolded, Crown Prince Akihito and Crown Princess Michiko emerged as the new face of Japan's imperial family, modern, engaged, and accessible. Their marriage had redefined the monarchy in the public's imagination, and now, their duties as the next generation of imperial leadership began to take shape. The post-war reconstruction had ushered Japan into a period of rapid economic growth and international reintegration, and the Crown Prince became an ambassador of this revitalized national identity. In the early 1960s, Akihito undertook numerous official duties alongside his wife. One of the most significant diplomatic moments of this decade came in September 1960, when the Crown Prince and Princess traveled to the United States for a 16-day goodwill visit commemorating the centennial of Japan-U.S. relations. It marked the first time that an imperial couple had visited the United States. Their warm reception by American officials and the general public was seen as a triumph of post-war reconciliation. The visit helped to soften lingering animosities from the war and built bridges between the two nations that had once been bitter enemies. The imperial couple's tour included visits to the White House, where they met President Dwight D. Eisenhower, as well as stops in major cities such as New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago. During their stay in Chicago, the city's mayor presented Akihito with a gift: a population of bluegill fish native to the Mississippi River system. Moved by the gift and the potential it represented for supplementing food supplies in post-war Japan, Akihito brought the fish back home and introduced them into Japanese waters through the Fisheries Research Agency. While his intentions were noble, the bluegill later became an invasive species, disrupting local ecosystem development. The emperor would candidly acknowledge decades later with regret. During the 1960s, Crown Prince Akihito and Princess Michiko expanded their family. In 1965, their second son, Prince Fumihito Ayano Miya, was born. 4 years later, in 1969, their daughter, Princess Sayako Norinomiya, completed the family. As parents, Akihito and Michiko sought to raise their children in an environment less constrained by traditional formality. Though still subject to imperial expectations, their parenting style included shared family meals and active participation in their children's early education, significant departure from earlier imperial norms that often saw children raised by court officials. In addition to his role as a father and public figure, Akihito deepened his intellectual pursuits, particularly in the field of ichthyology, the scientific study of fish. This growing academic interest would later define him as a rare blend of monarch and scientist. But even in these earlier years, the Crown Prince's curiosity and discipline became known within academic circles. He took a special interest in goby fish, small bottom dwellers inhabiting Japan's rivers and coastal waters. He began a rigorous study of taxonomy and species classification, collaborating with researchers and publishing scientific papers under his own name in peer-reviewed journals. His meticulous research would eventually lead to international recognition. In 1975, Akihito and Michiko undertook a historic visit to Okinawa, 3 years after its reversion to Japanese administration from the United States. This was a deeply symbolic act, as Okinawa had suffered some of the heaviest civilian casualties during World War II and had long felt alienated from mainland Japan. The couple's presence was meant to foster reconciliation and healing. However, the trip was not without incident. During their visit to the Himeyuri Peace Museum, leftist radicals threw a Molotov cocktail in protest of the imperial presence. Although the attack failed to injure anyone and security forces quickly subdued the assailants, the event underscored lingering resentments and the complexities of imperial symbolism in a democratic society. Despite the unrest, Akihito's words during the visit expressing grief for the sacrifices of the Okinawan people and hope for lasting peace were widely appreciated and marked a turning point in the relationship between Okinawa and the imperial family. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Akihito increasingly acted as his father's proxy in official matters, especially as Emperor Shōwa's health began to decline. One notable event was his 1987 visit to Okinawa on behalf of Emperor Shōwa, who had planned to go himself but fell ill. At the Peace Memorial Hall in southern Okinawa, Akihito solemnly read a message from his father, acknowledging the pain and hardship endured by the people of Okinawa both during and after the war. These words were not only a diplomatic gesture but also a rare moment of public imperial reflection on wartime suffering, a theme Akihito would return to repeatedly in his reign. By the 1980s, Akihito's role as heir apparent had matured into one of deep responsibility and national symbolism. As Japan continued its rapid rise to economic superpower status, Akihito and Michiko worked to soften the image of the monarchy. They attended events with ordinary citizens, visited disaster-stricken areas, and made conscious efforts to listen and respond empathetically to those they met. Unlike previous generations, who maintained considerable distance from the populace, the couple shook hands, made eye contact, and addressed people directly. Their public warmth was also complemented by their mutual respect and affection, which was evident to observers and widely admired. Akihito often spoke with deep appreciation for Michiko's intelligence, poise, and dedication. Her presence, too, helped modernize the monarchy's image. A commoner by birth, she brought into the palace not just a new social dynamic, but a sense of relatability that had previously been absent in Japan's centuries-old institution. Akihito's evolving public role came to embody the principles of the new constitutional monarchian emperor without political power, but with moral authority and spiritual presence. He embraced this symbolic role with grace and humility, blending tradition with humanity. His scientific mind, diplomatic tact, and quiet strength earned him the respect of the Japanese people and international observers alike. As the 1980s drew to a close and Emperor Shōwa's health deteriorated, the nation quietly prepared for the end of one era and the beginning of another. The Crown Prince, now seasoned by decades of public service and private study, stood ready to assume the throne. His transition from a wartime-born prince to a post-war crown prince had been marked not by triumphalism but by introspection, humility, and a commitment to the ideals of peace and progress. Part 4. The Heisei Emperor Accession, Symbolism and a New Imperial Identity, 1989, 1999. On January 7, 1989, the long reign of Emperor Shōwa Hirohito, which had lasted 62 years, came to an end with his death at age 87. Japan, shrouded in official mourning, bid farewell to an emperor whose reign encompassed the extremes of militarist expansion and post-war recovery. That same day, Crown Prince Akihito ascended to the throne, becoming the 125th Emperor of Japan. At the age of 55, he became one of the older emperors to exceed in modern history. Under the post-war constitution, the succession was a ceremonial matter governed by law, and thus the new era of imperial rule began without the grandiose enthronement rituals of the past. Akihito's first official act as emperor was participating in the Kenji Touche no Geeth, formal succession ritual involving the transmission of the imperial regalia, the sword and the jewel symbolic objects dating back to mythic times. These sacred items were presented in a private ceremony held within the imperial palace, signifying continuity and legitimacy. The following day, January 8, 1989, the government announced the beginning of a new imperial era, Heisei, Pincheng, meaning achieving peace. The new era name was selected in accordance with the era name law and signaled the aspirations of the Japanese government and public for an age of stability, civility, and peace in contrast to the turbulence of the Shōwa era. The Heisei Emperor, as Akihito would come to be known, had no political power but enormous symbolic weight. His challenge was to define and embody this role in ways that were both faithful to the constitution and meaningful to the Japanese people. In his first public address as emperor, delivered at the Sokui-go-cha Ken no Gith ceremony of first audience after enthronement, Akihito pledged his commitment to the constitution and the duties entrusted to him. He spoke not as a ruler, but as a servant of peace and unity. I swear that I will act according to the Constitution of Japan and fulfill my responsibility as the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people, while always wishing for the happiness of the people and the peace of the world. This marked a notable departure in tone from earlier emperors and encapsulated his vision of the modern monarchion grounded in service, humility, and human connection. In 1990, after the official mourning period ended, formal ceremonies for Akihito's enthronement were held. The Sokui no Reisiden no Gith main enthronement ceremony was conducted on November 12 inside the Imperial Palace. For the first time in history, the Takamakura, Imperial Throne, was transported from the Kyoto Imperial Palace to Tokyo, symbolizing a definitive shift from the Heian-era traditions to the modern capital. Dressed in solemn imperial garments and standing upon the dais before global dignitaries and national leaders, Akihito again affirmed his constitutional role and expressed his hopes for peace and national prosperity. Following the enthronement, the Daige, a secretive and sacred harvest ritual in which the emperor communes with the gods and offers newly harvested rice was performed in November 1990. Though spiritual in nature, the ritual was scrutinized by a modern public increasingly conscious of the separation between religion and state. Nonetheless, Akihito approached it with quiet dignity, respecting its cultural significance while adapting to contemporary expectations. As emperor, Akihito immediately began redefining the image of the monarchy through his actions. He placed an unprecedented emphasis on interpersonal connection, compassion, and public visibility. While still limited by constitutional restrictions, he and Empress Michiko traveled extensively within Japan, meeting with ordinary citizens, disaster survivors, and marginalized communities. Akihito made a conscious effort to engage directly with the Pio-Planat through proclamations from afar, but through handshakes, bowed heads, and sincere words of empathy. In 1991, in the wake of the eruption of Mount Unzen's Fugen Peak in Nagasaki Prefecture, the Emperor and Empress visited the affected region. In an extraordinary gesture that defied centuries of court protocol, Akihito knelt on the floor to speak to survivors face to face. This act, previously unheard of for an emperor, was a profound expression of equality and solidarity. It also set a precedent for future imperial engagements, with other members of the family later emulating his example. As Japan faced natural disasters, economic stagnation following the collapse of the asset bubble, and changing social norms, Akihito became a reassuring constant. He recognized that in the absence of political power, the emperor could still wield moral and emotional influence. He did so not with grandeur, but with sincere modesty, embracing his position as a figure of national unity rather than a relic of imperial grandeur. In October 1992, Emperor Akihito undertook a historic and controversial state visit to the People's Republic of China, the first by a Japanese emperor in history. Though the move faced political resistance and unresolved tensions from Japan's wartime past, Akihito's visit was diplomatically crucial. During a state banquet, he expressed deep sorrow for the suffering inflicted by Japan during the war. Though he stopped short of issuing a formal apology, his words were carefully crafted to convey remorse and reflection. The visit was seen internationally as a step toward reconciliation and became one of the defining foreign engagements of his reign. The emperor also played a symbolic role in Japan's participation in the global community. At the opening ceremony of the 1998 Winter Olympics in Nagano, he declared the Games open in his capacity as the head of state. This marked the third time an emperor had performed this ceremonial role, following his father's openings of the Tokyo and Sapporo Olympics. Domestically, Akihito continued to visit all 47 prefectures of Japan, often returning multiple times to regions affected by natural disasters. He expressed his gratitude to civil servants, medical workers, and volunteers in person, showing a deep awareness of the fabric of Japanese society. He frequently offered comfort to the elderly and those living in remote areas. For many citizens, especially the post-war generation, Akihito was the most familiar and human face of the monarchy they had ever known. In November 1999, Japan celebrated the 10th anniversary of his accession with national festivals and ceremonies. At a public address at the Imperial Palace, Akihito stood with Empress Michiko and humbly acknowledged the support of the people, saying, "I am deeply grateful that I have been able to carry out my duties with the warm understanding and support of the people." By the close of the 20th century, Emperor Akihito had successfully redefined the role of the emperor in modern Japan. He had neither sought power nor retreated into seclusion. Instead, he had emerged as a thoughtful, compassionate, and modern sovereign known whose strength lay not in command, but in connection. Part 5. A Monarch of Reconciliation and Compassion. The Middle Years of Heisei, 2000–2010. As the Heisei era entered its second decade, Emperor Akihito's role as the symbol of national unity continued to evolve. In a Japan that faced both domestic challenges and international scrutiny, Akihito positioned himself as a monarch of compassion, reconciliation, and quiet courage. The early 2000s were marked by major events, both natural and political, that allowed him to further assert his deeply held values of peace, humility, and empathy. One of the most poignant themes of Akihito's reign during this period was his ongoing commitment to acknowledging Japan's wartime legacy. In June 2005, during a state visit to Saipan, a site of ferocious fighting during World War II, Emperor Akihito and Empress Michiko visited several war memorials, including the Korean Peace Memorial. Though the Korean victims of the war had long been underrepresented in Japanese narratives, Akihito's decision to visit this monument was deliberate and meaningful. He paid silent tribute to the Korean conscripts who had perished, thereby offering a subtle but powerful gesture toward reconciliation with the Korean people. The imperial couple's visit to Saipan also included sites where Japanese civilians and soldiers had perished, including the cliffs where many had leapt to their deaths to avoid capture. Akihito's presence was a deeply symbolic act of mourning, not for the military conquests of the past, but for the human suffering it wrought. His actions were interpreted domestically and abroad as a personal attempt to bring closure to the painful legacy of the Pacific War. Throughout this period, Emperor Akihito remained deeply engaged with Japan's many regions and communities. He and Empress Michiko maintained a rigorous travel schedule, continuing to visit all 47 prefectures and often returning to areas previously struck by natural disasters. These visits were not perfunctory. They involved heartfelt interactions with citizens affected by adversity, those displaced by earthquakes, floods, and typhoons. Akihito's signature style, kneeling down to speak to survivors at eye level, was by now an iconic feature of his reign. He and Empress Michiko were often seen listening intently, offering gentle words and expressing sincere emotion. In 2004 and 2007, Akihito revisited the subject of foreign visits, extending Japan's diplomatic reach through symbolic exchanges. He welcomed foreign dignitaries, including Chinese leaders such as Vice President Hu Jintao and later Xi Jinping. Despite the complexities of Japan-China relations, especially concerning wartime memory and territorial disputes, Emperor Akihito maintained a stance of cultural diplomacy. He expressed an appreciation for shared historical and cultural ties, often referencing classical Chinese poetry and Confucian ideals in his addresses. At home, the emperor continued to serve as a unifying figure during times of political transition. Amid changes in leadership, including the turbulent years of shifting prime ministers in the early 2000s, Xi's role as a nonpartisan, stabilizing presence became even more valued. Unlike elected officials whose popularity rose and fell, Akihito consistently garnered high public approval. Polls during this period routinely showed that more than 80% of Japanese citizens respected and supported the emperor, not for his authority, but for his humanity. It was during this time, too, that Akihito began to reflect publicly on his own family history in the context of East Asian geopolitics. In December 2001, during a press conference on his birthday, he made a groundbreaking comment acknowledging that Emperor Kanmu's mother was descended from the royal family of Baekje, an ancient Korean kingdom. This statement was historically accurate, but politically sensitive. Nonetheless, Akihito chose to make the remark, stating, "I feel a certain kinship with Korea, as it is recorded in the Shoku Nihongi that Emperor Kanmu's mother was descended from the king of Baekje." In doing so, he subtly but deliberately reinforced the idea of historical interconnectedness rather than division, offering a gentle rebuke to rising nationalistic rhetoric that had begun to re-emerge in parts of Japanese political discourse. Meanwhile, Emperor Akihito continued to pursue his scientific interests with unwavering passion. His research on goby fish, family Gobiidae, expanded during this time, and he continued to publish in academic journals, including contributions to international publications. In 2000, 2008, and 2016, Akihito was listed as the lead author in studies published in the journal Gene, showcasing a depth of understanding and scholarly dedication rare among monarchs. His work was not honorary. It was grounded in field research, taxonomy, and peer-reviewed analysis. He was particularly known for describing new species and refining the classification of various fish in the Indo-Pacific region. His academic peers, both domestic and international, came to regard him as a genuine scientist in his own right. He was honored with numerous memberships in learned societies, including the Linnean Society of London, as an honorary member and foreign fellow, and received the Charles II Medal in 1998 for his contributions to biology. In 2007, during a visit to Sweden, Uppsala University conferred upon him honorary fellowship status in recognition of his scientific work. Though he was now in his 70s, Akihito showed no signs of retreating from his imperial duties. In fact, 2010 marked the 20th year of his reign, and the milestone was commemorated with a public festival attended by tens of thousands. At the National Theatre in Tokyo, the emperor addressed the people once again with his characteristic humility and resolve. "I have always hoped to share in the joys and sorrows of the people and fulfill my duties in accordance with the Constitution." However, behind the scenes, concerns about Akihito's health and the toll of public duties were beginning to surface. He had undergone prostate cancer surgery in 2003 and began experiencing occasional symptoms of cerebral anemia in the late 2000s. Though he recovered well and continued his activities with composure, the physical strain was undeniable. Even so, the emperor showed no signs of relinquishing his responsibilities. Instead, he began gradually preparing the imperial family for transition. His eldest son, Crown Prince Naruhito, and his wife, Crown Princess Masako, had begun taking on more public engagements, as had Prince Fumihito and Princess Kiko. By quietly transferring responsibilities, Akihito ensured a smooth generational shift and continuity of the monarchy's symbolic role. By the end of this period, Akihito had accomplished something few monarchs in history could claim. He had transformed Japan's emperorship from an aloof relic of pre-war authoritarianism into a compassionate, scientifically engaged, and pacifist institution. He had not merely reigned, he had quietly revolutionized what it meant to be emperor. Part 6. Toward the Sunset of a Reign, Disaster, Devotion, and the Will to Abdicate, 2011-2016. The second decade of the 21st century brought new challenges and fresh tests of resilience for Emperor Akihito. Though advancing in age, he remained steadfast in his mission to be a comforting presence and unifying figure for the Japanese people. Now, in his late 70s and early 80s, Akihito continued to fulfill his ceremonial and moral duties with undiminished seriousness, even as his physical strength began to wane. On March 11, 2011, one of the most defining events of his reign struck Japan: the Great East Japan earthquake, followed by a devastating tsunami and the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. The scale of the tragedy was almost incomprehensible. More than 20,000 dead or missing, entire towns washed away, and a nuclear crisis of global concern. It was the most serious national emergency Japan had faced since World War II. In the aftermath, Emperor Akihito took the unprecedented step of addressing the nation via a video message on March 16, 2011. In the softly spoken words of a sovereign with no political power but profound moral authority, he expressed deep sorrow and solidarity with the victims, encouraging people to help one another and remain hopeful in the face of devastation. It was the first time an emperor had directly spoken to the public on television in such a personal and emotional manner. He said, in part, "I sincerely hope that those affected by the disaster will never give up hope, take care of themselves, and continue to live strong for tomorrow." The message had an immense impact. For many, his calm demeanor and heartfelt empathy became a source of emotional solace. In a society known for restraint, Akihito's visible concern and direct engagement offered a model of compassion and dignity. Together with Empress Michiko, Akihito visited evacuation shelters and tsunami-ravaged towns. They knelt on floors beside survivors, listened attentively to their stories, and bowed their heads in respect for the dead. These visits were not fleeting photo opportunities but long and deliberate acts of comfort and solidarity. Akihito's approach, humble, present, and visibly affected, demonstrated his deep sense of duty and humanity. The response to the disaster reflected the broader arc of his reign, a monarchy grounded in moral responsibility rather than authority. Yet, the physical toll on Akihito was becoming clearer. In 2012, he underwent heart bypass surgery. While he recovered well, the cumulative strain of decades of ceremonial and public activity began to weigh more heavily on him. Despite this, Akihito never retreated from public life. In December 2012, at a press conference marking his 79th birthday, he answered questions with clarity and purpose, showing no signs of disengagement. He spoke warmly of his family, expressing gratitude to Crown Prince Naruhito and Prince Fumihito for supporting him in his duties. Still, inside the imperial household agency, conversations were quietly taking place about the future of the monarchy. Japan had no modern precedent for imperial abdication. Since the implementation of the Meiji-era constitution and the establishment of a modern imperial system, emperors had remained on the throne until death. The last emperor to abdicate had done so over 200 years earlier, Emperor Kaku, in the early 19th century. Then, on July 13, 2016, reports began to circulate through NHK and major newspapers that Emperor Akihito had expressed his desire to abdicate. According to sources, he felt increasingly concerned about his ability to perform his duties as symbol of the state under the Constitution. It was not just the rituals and ceremonies that weighed on him, but the fear that he would remain emperor in name only, unable to fulfill his role with dignity and energy. Initially, the imperial household agency denied the reports, stating that the emperor had made no such explicit request. Yet speculation continued, and the public reaction was largely supportive. The Japanese people, who had grown accustomed to Akihito's humility and honesty, understood that his sense of duty would not permit him to remain as a figurehead unable to serve. On August 8, 2016, Emperor Akihito broke with precedent again and released a carefully worded, pre-recorded address to the nation. Titled, "Message Regarding My Duties as Emperor." It was not a legal declaration of abdication, but a deeply personal reflection. He said, "As I approach the latter years of my life, I am concerned that it may become difficult for me to carry out my duties as the symbol of the state with my whole being, as I have done until now." The emperor refrained from directly stating he wished to abdicate, since expressing such a will could be interpreted as a political act, which he was constitutionally forbidden from making. But the message was unmistakably clear. He sought understanding from the people and from the government to find a lawful path toward abdication. His statement was met with overwhelming public sympathy and respect. Polls indicated that the vast majority of citizens supported his decision. Media outlets described it as an act of humility and foresight. For constitutional scholars, it marked a moment of careful negotiation between tradition and modern governance. And for Akihito himself, it was a continuation of the values that had shaped his entire reign: service, honesty, and devotion to the people. The path to abdication was not simple. There was no legal mechanism in place under the imperial household law to allow for it. The government, under Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, began consultations and debates. It became clear that a special, one-time law would need to be created to accommodate Akihito's unprecedented request. By the end of 2016, the Japanese people were preparing for the possibility that the emperor who had guided them through eras of hardship and healing would soon step down, not in disgrace or defeat, but in grace, by his own volition, having fulfilled his role with unwavering sincerity. Part 7. Abdication and the Dawn of a New Era, the Final Acts of a Devoted Emperor, 2017-2019. Following Emperor Akihito's public message in 2016 expressing his wish to abdicate, Japan entered a thoughtful and measured process to honor his request. For more than a year, politicians, legal scholars, and members of the Imperial Household Agency deliberated how to make possible what had not been done for over 2 centuries. With no constitutional or statutory provision for abdication, an extraordinary solution had to be found that respected both tradition and the emperor's sincere concern for his responsibilities. On June 9, 2017, the National Diet of Japan passed the Act on Special Measures Concerning the Emperor's Abdication, a one-time law that applied exclusively to Emperor Akihito. This carefully crafted legislation avoided setting a blanket precedent for all future emperors, but recognized the singular nature of Akihito's service and the unique circumstances of his request. It was a legal innovation born of respect for a monarch whose reign had consistently placed the well-being of his people above personal privilege. The law designated April 30, 2019 as the date of abdication. Preparations began in earnest for a meticulously planned transition that would balance centuries-old ritual with the demands of a modern democratic society. Throughout 2018 and early 2019, Emperor Akihito continued to fulfill his public duties, often accompanied by Empress Michiko, as he bid a gradual farewell to his role. Public events in the lead-up to his abdication were filled with gratitude and reverence. On February 24, 2019, the government hosted the official ceremony to commemorate the 30th anniversary of His Majesty the Emperor's accession to the throne. A visibly moved Akihito thanked the people for their unwavering support throughout his reign. Just weeks later, on April 10, he and Empress Michiko celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary, an occasion that drew national attention to the personal partnership that had defined and strengthened his rule. Then, on April 1, 2019, the Japanese government announced the name of the new era to begin upon Crown Prince Naruhito's accession, Reiwa Linghe, meaning beautiful harmony. Akihito formally signed the documents proclaiming the change, making him the last reigning emperor to authorize a new era before stepping down. On April 30, 2019, Emperor Akihito performed his final public duty as sovereign in the Tairei Seiden no Gi, ceremony of abdication, held in the Pine Room, Matsu no Ma, of the Imperial Palace. Dressed in a Western-style mourning coat and flanked by his wife and immediate family, Akihito addressed the nation for the final time as emperor. He stated, "I have performed my duties as the emperor with a deep sense of trust and respect for the people. I sincerely thank the people who accepted me and supported me in my role as the symbol of the state. I hope with all my heart that the Reiwa era, which will begin tomorrow, will be peaceful and fruitful, and I hereby pray for the well-being and happiness of our country and the people of the world." With those words, he concluded 3 decades of service as Japan's head of state. At midnight, May 1, 2019, Crown Prince Naruhito ascended the throne as the 126th Emperor of Japan, and the new era of Reiwa officially began. Akihito, now referred to as J.K., Emperor Emeritus, became the first emperor to voluntarily abdicate since 1817 and the first in modern Japanese constitutional history. The smooth transition, unmarred by political friction or public confusion, was widely praised as a successive testament to Akihito's humility and the careful stewardship of the imperial household. For many Japanese, the emperor's departure evoked feelings of both nostalgia and admiration. While his role had been largely ceremonial, his presence had come to symbolize moral leadership and national healing. In retiring from the throne, Akihito reinforced the same message he had conveyed throughout his reign: that the emperor is not a divine figure but a servant of the people, not a ruler, but a symbolone who listens, mourns, rejoices, and stands beside the nation through joy and hardship. Empress Michiko, whose quiet strength and emotional intelligence had matched her husband's public service step for step, also stepped away from her public role. The couple relocated to the Sent, Gosho, imperial residence for retired sovereigns, in the Akasaka estate in Tokyo. Though retired from public life, they remained under the attention and affection of the Japanese people. On May 4, 2019, just days after the abdication, tens of thousands gathered outside the imperial palace to shout thank you and wave flags in tribute to the emperor and empress emeriti. It was a spontaneous and emotional outpouring, a testament to the enduring affection and trust Akihito had earned over his decades as monarch. With his abdication, Akihito not only concluded the Heisei era, but left behind a reimagined monarchy, one that was compassionate, humble, and intimately connected to the daily lives of the people it symbolized. He had not merely passed a throne to his son, he had passed on a transformed legacy. Part 8. Life as Emperor Emeritus: Quiet Retirement, Reflection, and Enduring Influence. 2019-2022. After his historic abdication in April 2019, Emperor Akihito assumed the title J.K. Shōwa, or Emperor Emeritus, and embarked on a new chapter in his life characterized by quietude, scholarly pursuits, and a deepening bond with the people of Japan, who continued to revere him. Although no longer the reigning sovereign, Akihito remained a figure of profound symbolic and emotional significance, admired for the dignity with which he had carried his role and the humanity he had consistently displayed. Upon abdication, Akihito and Empress Emerita Michiko moved from the imperial palace to the Sent, Gosho, a former crown prince's residence, refurbished as their retirement home, located in the Akasaka estate in Tokyo's Minato ward. The modest elegance of the residence reflected the former emperor's lifelong preference for simplicity and quiet devotion. In retirement, the imperial couple stepped back from public life but continued to follow events in Japan with attentiveness, offering private condolences and quiet encouragement during times of national distress. One of the first occasions in which Akihito reappeared in public following his abdication was on January 2, 2020, when he participated in the New Year's greetings ceremony at the imperial palace, standing alongside his son Emperor Naruhito and other imperial family members. It was a moment of national warmth and continuity, symbolizing that although his reign had ended, his legacy continued to guide the imperial family and its evolving role in contemporary society. Yet retirement was not a withdrawal from all pursuits. Akihito remained intellectually active, particularly in the field of ichthyology, his lifelong passion. Even into his late 80s, he continued research on goby fish, family Gobiidae, frequently visiting the Biological Research Institute within the imperial palace grounds. In 2020, a year after his abdication, he contributed to the identification of a new species of goby found in southern Japan, a remarkable achievement for any scientist, let alone a retired monarch. This discovery was especially significant as it marked his first published research since leaving the throne. Akihito's scholarly contributions had long been respected in academic circles. As of 2018, he had authored or co-authored 28 scientific papers published in journals of the Ichthyological Society of Japan. His work focused on taxonomy, morphology, and species classification, especially within the Indo-Pacific region. Unlike many monarchs whose intellectual pursuits are ceremonial or symbolic, Akihito's work was rigorous and credible, often conducted in collaboration with leading marine biologists. In recognition of his lifetime dedication, several species of goby were named in his honor. including Xerius Akihito and Platygobiopsis Akihito, as well as an entire genus Akihito. Despite his health challenges, including earlier prostate surgery and episodes of cerebral anemia, Akihito maintained a disciplined routine in retirement. The Imperial Household Agency reported that he engaged in regular walks with Empress Michiko, kept a daily reading schedule, and continued to consult scientific material. However, his advancing age made health monitoring essential. In January 2020, shortly after a private outing, Akihito briefly collapsed in his residence, prompting a visit from the palace medical team. While no serious condition was detected, the event was a sobering reminder of the former emperor's advancing years. That same year, Japan, like much of the world, was struck by the COVID-19 pandemic. Though Akihito and Michiko did not make public addresses, the Imperial Household Agency confirmed that they followed the situation with concern. The couple was described as reading news reports closely and offering quiet support to the imperial family's ongoing efforts to comfort the nation during difficult times. The contrast between their silence and the active engagement of Emperor Naruhito highlighted a graceful transfer of symbolic responsibility, one that Akihito had engineered with remarkable foresight. Even in retirement, Akihito continued to embody the values he had championed throughout his life: dignity, compassion, scholarship, and humility. He remained uninvolved in political matters, as required by constitutional restrictions, but his past statements and actions continued to influence public discourse, especially regarding historical memory, reconciliation with neighboring nations, and the role of the monarchy in a democracy. In 2021, Akihito reached an extraordinary milestone. He became the longest-lived emperor in recorded Japanese history, surpassing the lifespan of his father, Emperor Shōwa, Hirohito, who had lived 87 years and 85 days. This quiet achievement, though not publicly celebrated with grandeur, was recognized by historians and citizens alike as a symbol of the continuity and resilience of the Japanese monarchy in the modern age. Later that year, in March 2021, Emperor Emeritus Akihito and Empress Emerita Michiko moved into their permanent retirement residence, the Shōwa, newly refurbished section of the former Akasaka imperial residence. The move marked the final phase in their quiet departure from imperial duties. Yet even from the serene surroundings of their new home, the couple remained closely watched and respected by the Japanese public, who viewed them as elder statespersons of national memory and sentiment. Throughout these years, Akihito's decision to abdicate remained widely praised. It was regarded not only as a personal act of grace, but also a defining moment of the Heisei era. His example had initiated conversations about succession, aging leadership, and the evolving expectations of Japan's monarchy. As Emperor Emeritus, he set another precedent, that a former emperor could live in retirement with serenity and dignity, free from the burden of ceremony but still deeply committed to the moral ethos of his life service. By the end of 2022, as Japan continued into the Reiwa era under Emperor Naruhito, the legacy of Akihito remained deeply woven into the fabric of the nation. His presence, though quieter, continued to embody the spirit of a sovereign who chose not to rule, but to serve, who led not by command, but by empathy, and who left the throne not from fatigue, but from devotion to duty. Part 9. The Legacy of Emperor Akihito: Reflection, Reverence, and the Shape of a Modern Monarch, 2023 present. As Emperor Emeritus Akihito entered the later years of his life, the full arc of his legacy began to settle into the national consciousness, not merely as history, but as a living influence that continued to shape the role of Japan's monarchy. By 2023, Akihito was no longer seen in public frequently, and his appearances were rare and carefully planned. Yet his moral authority and symbolic significance remained profound, quietly anchoring the identity of the modern imperial family and the evolving expectations of the Japanese people. At 90 years old, Akihito resided peacefully in the Gosho with Empress Emerita Michiko, who herself had grown increasingly frail with age. The couple maintained a tranquil daily routine: morning walks in the garden, light reading, classical music, and occasional private visits to institutions and individuals with whom they had long-standing relationships. Though the burden of public duties had passed to Emperor Naruhito and Empress Masako, the reverence shown toward Akihito never waned. In the minds of many, Akihito was not only the man who had redefined the modern Japanese emperor, he was the one who had humanized it. The Heisei era, which his reign had defined, was remembered for its emphasis on pacifism, humility, compassion, and domestic outreach. Unlike monarchs of the distant past who ruled from seclusion or ceremony, Akihito had knelt beside survivors in evacuation centers, spoken directly to grieving families, and offered gestures of reconciliation to former enemies of war. These actions forever altered what the Japanese people expected of their monarch. His relationship with the Japanese constitution also left a lasting mark. Akihito had always shown deep deference to the 1947 Constitution and the post-war democratic structure it enshrined. While some voices in political discourse occasionally called for revisions to restore more authority to the monarchy, Akihito consistently emphasized the importance of constitutional limits. In doing so, he preserved the non-political, symbolic nature of the throne and reinforced the trust between the monarchy and the people. Scholars, journalists, and biographers began to examine his life and reign more thoroughly in the early 2020s. Numerous publications praised his unprecedented scientific contributions to ichthyology, his dedication to memory and reconciliation, and the personal courage it took to voluntarily abdicate, a move that placed his duty to the nation above the traditions of unbroken service until death. His abdication, once considered unthinkable, had opened new paths for succession planning and humane leadership within the imperial house. Additionally, Akihito's speeches were now studied as reflections of a thoughtful, philosophical monarch. He had made a habit during his reign of holding annual press conferences before his birthday in December, using the occasion to speak on historical memory, post-war reconstruction, the importance of peace, and Japan's place in the world. He had carefully navigated constitutional boundaries while subtly expressing deeply held values, concern for aging society, understanding among nations, and the need to remember the consequences of war. Among his most impactful remarks was his reflection in 2001 on Emperor Kanmu's Korean heritage, which challenged hardline nationalism with scholarly grace. Likewise, his heartfelt statements about the pain of Okinawa's history and the suffering of Asia during World War II became touchstones for advocates of historical reconciliation. In these moments, Akihito proved that even within a constrained constitutional framework, the emperor could guide national conscience. In his personal life, Akihito's long marriage to Michiko was also celebrated as a model of partnership and devotion. From their first meeting on a tennis court in Karuizawa in 1957 to their shared imperial duties and into retirement, theirs was a union that captivated the public and lent a human face to the monarchy. Their mutual respect and support, often visible in quiet gestures and shared smiles, became a symbol of dignity and resilience in a society rapidly evolving through economic, social, and demographic transformation. The decision by both Akihito and Michiko to be cremated, breaking from the centuries-old tradition of burial for emperors, was another sign of their commitment to modernity, humility. This choice, made public in 2013, was framed as a reflection of their desire to reduce the physical and ceremonial burdens on the state and imperial household. It was a personal yet deeply symbolic act that reinforced the image of Akihito as a reform-minded sovereign who balanced tradition with practicality. By 2024, following the passing of Princess Yuriko, Akihito became the oldest living member of the imperial family. He continued to be held in affectionate regard by the Japanese people. The image of the elderly Emperor Emeritus reading quietly in the imperial library or conducting private research was one that touched many citizens. He had come full circle from a wartime child raised in seclusion to a scientific thinker, compassionate monarch, and wise elder. Today, Emperor Emeritus Akihito stands as a figure of rare grace in the long and storied history of the Japanese monarchy. His legacy is not built upon military conquest, political reform, or economic policy, but on the quiet power of compassion, humility, intellect, and service. In his own words, he wished only to be a symbol of the nation's unity and well-being. In this, he not only succeeded, he redefined the very meaning of what it meant to be emperor in a modern age. His life's journey continues, now in peace and reflection, but the impact of his reign will echo for generations.